So this is Cost Avoidance webinar number 3 in our series, and we've been really excited about the level of interest that this series have gained from our users. So we'll be continuing our software feature webinar series over time as we're seeing you guys are getting a lot out of it. So I'm going to introduce Steve Heinz. He's our founder and CEO, and he really is the brainchild behind Cost Avoidance, and we're thrilled to be able to have his time to lead this webinar. So Steve, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It is good to see all of your names online. I wanted to give a special hello to a few of you. Hopefully you know who you are: Dawn, Gadir, Greg, Jim, Christine, Michael, Matthew, Marty, Ingrid, just some special clients out there. It's nice to see that you're online, and good afternoon to everyone else as well. So this is session number 3 on cost avoidance, and today I'm going to be talking about cost avoidance in EnergyCAP. What do you click on? How do you operate cost avoidance in EnergyCAP? A brief introduction. First of all, I mentioned this is webinar number 3 in a series of 4. I started with M&V fundamentals. You can download the PDF. We have that available for you. And then 2 weeks later, I did a session on calendarization and normalization. That's not the same as full-blown cost avoidance. It has some of the same principles, but it doesn't take it as far as IPMVP compliant cost avoidance. You can also download the PDF on that. And the recording of the webinar series is also available on our website. Today, we're talking about the basics of cost avoidance in EnergyCAP. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to wrap this up with a session exclusively devoted to cost avoidance reports. We have 50+ cost avoidance reports. I'm not going to go through every one, obviously, but point out the ones that would be of most value to you. Now, a few things I wanted to mention before I get into the live demo. The cost avoidance module in EnergyCAP adheres to the calculation requirements of IPMVP, the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol. It's been used in essentially the same form for 30 years now. The first version of it was released in 1985, and if I would show you the user manual from 1985, you would see that the terminology and the methodology is essentially unchanged. More sophisticated, more bells and whistles, obviously, but the basic engineering principles have been unchanged since 1985. So this cost avoidance methodology has been used for 30+ years. We've calculated cost avoidance on tens of thousands of buildings. Using it, we have over 20,000 buildings just in EnergyCAP online that are using active cost avoidance reporting on a daily or a monthly basis today. So it gets a lot of use. Some of the limitations of cost avoidance in EnergyCAP. Now this is option C, which is the whole facility approach per IPMVP. That means we're fundamentally looking at the building as a bubble and saying, what did this bubble used to consume and what does it consume today? And we make adjustments to that to normalize it, and we calculate the avoidance. When you've implemented multiple projects in that bubble, in that building, you really can't use cost avoidance in EnergyCAP to discern the results of each project individually. We know in the aggregate what the results are, but we can't say if we've had 5 projects, the specific savings of this one and this one and this one, because the data is not granular enough for that. Another limitation is if your base year is long ago, the further back you go, I would say the less reliable the calculations may be. There would be more uncertainty in the calculations because so many things change in buildings over time. Some of those changes take place slowly, but if you go back 10 years, the cumulative effect of some of those changes can be significant. Another limitation is when your cost of your commodity is primarily driven by demand charges, not by energy consumption charges, then the valuation of cost avoidance becomes complex. It's easy to evaluate savings using average unit cost or blended unit cost, but if you need to separately take demand into account, it's a very difficult process, and it's not something that we're really doing in EnergyCAP today. We're using average unit costs for valuation. And finally, if there's any non-standard baseline adjustments. Now, EnergyCAP is making baseline adjustments automatically for the number of days in the billing period, for degree days from weather data, for floor area. But when there's other things you have to adjust for, hours of occupancy, number of occupants, maybe you installed some retrofit that you don't want to double count. You might be doing separate M&V of a retrofit that you installed, and you want to kind of take that out of the equation. To do those kinds of special adjustments requires some special engineering skills. It's high skill level. It's usually a substantial time commitment. So doing very detailed and accurate cost avoidance on a lot of buildings is a very serious and time-consuming undertaking. Let me launch into the live demo, and we'll follow that by Q&A. Okay, my thanks to Loudoun County Schools for allowing us to use their database for this demo. I'm in EnergyCAP Online. I'm going to go right to a few meters and show you how we set up the meters and how we tune the weather. I've picked out an elementary school. I'm going to go to Buffalo Trail Elementary School. Open that up. You can see we have 4 different meters, a diesel meter that is just for the standby generator, a water meter, a gas meter, and electric meter. First, at the building level, when I'm highlighting the building, I'm going to go to the properties for that. Oh, sorry, I didn't click on it. Go to the properties for that. We'll take a look at where this thing is by clicking on Google Maps. And there it is. It's in Northern Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C. to the west. It is close to Dulles Airport, for those of you who know the area. Next, looking at the weather data for this, by clicking on that icon, we go to Weather Data Depot. This is our weather data repository. And let's take a look at where this station is. We're using station VAL, which is the closest one to the, which is the one that they happen to pick. What this is telling me is that the station that's assigned to this building is a forecast station. That means it's a very localized station as far as forecast goes, but it's pulling the historical data, the degree day data, from the station at Dulles Airport, which is a historical station. All of the degree days in EnergyCAP come from history stations, and we can, by clicking on Weather Data Depot, we can see where the weather stations are in the area, and by clicking on each one, we can see if it's a forecast station or if it is a history station. Again, all of these forecast stations are mapped to the nearest history station for degree day data. If we're looking at forecast data, localized forecast data, then we use the forecast station. That's the way EnergyCAP does that. Now, one question when we're looking at weather data is, when we pick a baseline year, are there any years that maybe we should be careful of because they are not typical? So in Weather Data Depot, I'm going to look at heating degree days because we're talking about the gas meter first. And let's take a look at this to see if any of these years are very different than others. One thing that you'll see by looking at the heating degree day chart and looking at the cumulative heating degree days as of December is that calendar year 2014 was unusual. If you look at the number of degree days, over 4,000 degree days, compared to calendar 2012, which was under 3,000 degree days, that's a significant difference. That means 2012 compared to 14 had a 34% increase in degree days. In other words, a lot more heating load. So 2012 was a mild year. 2014 was a very severe year. Those are some things we might want to be concerned about when we pick a baseline. Also looking at average daily temperature. February of 2015 was historically cold month. January 2015 was a very cold month. December of 2015 was a historically mild month. There were a couple other mild months in here. So you can take a look at this and get an idea of which years might be unusual. And it's typically good to stay away from unusual years as far as making them your base year. Now, let's get into the gas meter next. When we set up cost avoidance, we do that from the Savings tab. So I'll go to Savings tab and then go to Use versus Weather and open up the advanced settings. Now, as a default, the way this database is set up, or the way I've set it up, is that we're defaulting my balance point temperature to 65 degrees. I would normally recommend something lower than that, but just to illustrate, we're defaulting it to 65 degrees. We're defaulting it to attempt summer and attempt winter adjustments. The baseline year is set to start January 1, 2013. The baseline is a year long, 12 months. So the baseline is calendar year 13. The savings start is set to Jan 1, 2014. So we're saying we have a year of baseline, and then as soon as the baseline is over, we're going to start to report cost avoidance. We don't have to start the day that the baseline ends. There can be a dead band in there. You could say I want my baseline to be calendar 2013, but my project didn't get fully implemented until July of 2014, in which case my savings start date could be July 1st, 2014. So you can have a sort of a dead period in there where we're not calculating any cost avoidance. In this case, we don't have any dead band. We're starting right away. First, let's take a look at the use versus weather charts, because the purpose of this screen is to plot out the baseline bills and give us an indicator if this meter is weather sensitive. So first of all, it's plotted out the baseline bills in the winter months. The winter months are those months that have heating degree days in them. And we can set, I'll show you later, how many degree days you have to have in a billing period to be considered a winter month or a summer month. You know, some people say, well, what's winter? Are you arbitrarily saying winter starts in October and ends in April? No. Winter is defined as any billing period that has more than a certain number of heating degree days. And the number of heating degree days depends upon what the balance point is set at. So first of all, when I look at my use versus winter weather, I can see that these points seem to rise to the right in a relatively tight pattern. Each point is a baseline bill. So these black dots are bills in the baseline year, and they're plotted with usage on the vertical and degree days on the horizontal. In other words, as you go farther to the right, you get more degree days, and as you go up, you get more usage. So because going to the right gives me more degree days, that means my rightmost bill must have been my coldest billing period, and that was February of 2013. My second coldest was January of 2013 because it's a little bit to the left. As I work my way down, these are the mild months. They still had heating weather in them. They still had heating degree days. That's April. Less than that is October. Less than that is May. Less than that is September. When I look at my summer chart, it shows that in my hottest month, because this is cooling degree days, as I go to the right, my weather is hotter. My hottest month, July, had low usage. These other months had low usage. The only month that really had any amount of usage was April. Now, April also appeared over here on the heating chart. That means in the month of April, the billing period of April, we had some warm weather and we had some cool weather. So a bill can fall in both the winter chart and the summer chart at the same time. Now, the first thing that I see when I look at these charts is that this gas meter clearly has no summer weather dependency. So I'm just going to turn off attempt summer adjustment. There's no reason to even attempt it, to waste processing time, because it's a gas meter and I'm not using it to cool the building. So I'm just going to turn that off. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the winter. Does a balance point of 65 make sense? In other words, are all of these months legitimately heating months, or am I overstating my heating degree days? Well, what I normally do is look at the points that are to the far left, and I say September. Did I have my heating system on in September in Northern Virginia? Did I have my heating system on in May in Northern Virginia? No, probably not. These points probably are reflecting domestic hot water that's being used in the building or gas that's being used for cooking, but these are not legitimate heating months. You can see once I get to some colder months, October, April, it bumps up a bit, but these months are pretty flat, so I would like them to fall off of the graph. How do I make them fall off? I lower the balance point. By lowering the balance point, we recalculate the degree days in each bill, and you'll notice all the points move to the right, because with a lower balance point, we're lowering the point at which the temperature at which we have degree days. So notice one of those points just fell off the graph. And I'll lower it a little bit more. 57, 56. I would say right around there is probably a good model for this gas meter in this building. In other words, these are all legitimate heating months, not much here, but a little bit, and these months have more heating in them. So that's, I think, a pretty good model. The most important value on the screen is right here, the weather factor. This is therms per heating degree day. It's the slope of the green line, the slope of the regression line. That's primarily what we use to make the year-to-year adjustments. Now, you'll notice the slope of the line doesn't change very much. People say to me, how do you know for sure that 54 is the best balance point for this? Well, I don't. But at 54, my weather factor is 4.6. If I go down to 53, it doesn't change very much. If I go up to 55, it doesn't change very much. So it really doesn't make that much difference. Anywhere around 55 or 54 is probably a good model. This number is slightly different. It means the weather adjustment will be slightly different, but it doesn't mean it's going to give you more cost avoidance or less. It all depends on the year-to-year ratio of degree days. In any given month, it might give you 2% more cost avoidance in one month and 2% less cost avoidance in another month. Over the span of a year, it will probably make no difference at all. So right in there is a spot that makes sense. Certainly 55 or 54 is much better than 65 as a going-in assumption. Now, one other thing that I wanted to point out is this point right here. You'll notice the legend says it's an outlier. The way the regression works is we plot the points, we perform linear regression, we show the two standard deviation lines, these are the gray lines. But what happens if a point falls outside of two standard deviations? That's what happened to this point, to the January point. It's kind of way out in left field. It doesn't fit with the model established by the other points. Another way of saying it is the energy usage, the gas usage in January of 2013 is not explainable when we look at the other gas bills we got for that meter in that year. It's too high. So something unusual happened. It wasn't that the weather was super cold, because if the weather was super cold, this point would be farther to the right. There would be more degree days, and it would be way out here, and then it would fit within 2 standard deviations. So given the level of the temperature, the usage seems to be abnormally high. The way EnergyCAP handles that is it says, this is an outlier. I'm throwing it out of my weather model. My other points fit very nicely. And because I can't explain January for every January in the future, EnergyCAP will not make a weather adjustment for this meter for the date range covered by this baseline bill. Because EnergyCAP is saying, I cannot explain what happens in January. For all EnergyCAP knows, this building might have some unique operating characteristic in January. Maybe they only have night school in January and run for a lot more hours or something. We just don't know. But it doesn't fit in with the model, so we're going to throw it out and not make weather adjustments. That's important for you to realize, that weather adjustments will not be made for an outlier point. Now, you probably want to check the bill, because maybe the bill was entered wrong. Maybe the bill should be down here, and it was a keying mistake. It was a billing mistake. Find that now, get it in the baseline correctly. Otherwise, you're kind of dealing with that. You're carrying that mistake forward for every January in the future. One other thing that we can do with the interface, you'll see this additional years of data. This confuses people typically. I can set it defaults to 0, I can set it to 1, or I can set it to 2. When I increased it from 0 to 1, look at that I got more points in the regression. What this does is it backs up a year before the baseline. So now I've just pulled in calendar 2012, and I've said add 2012 to my regression to give me maybe a more solid level of confidence that I have a good regression. However, we are not creating a 2-year baseline. We're not averaging the years together. We're simply using 2012 in the regression to give me more confidence in the slope of the line. But for all other purposes, we still have a 12-month baseline. Now, we can't back up more years if we don't have data for more years. If I try to back up, let's see, that might have added a few points, but if you don't have more years of history, backing up more years doesn't do you any good. But so I guess in this case, I do have a couple extra years. So I backed up 2 years. So now my regression is plotted with 3 years of data. So now I have a lot of confidence in the slope of my line. Notice it's still 4 point something. Notice that this January is still an outlier. If I look at 3 whole years of utility bills, it proves even more to me that that was really an unusual January of 2013, even though I had some months that were much colder here in other years. Okay, so I can lock this in. If this is the way I have tuned the settings for this meter, I'm confident in it. I would save and reprocess. I can save and reprocess. It'll save my settings. It'll process all my savings, and then I am done with this meter. So now let me go to trends, and this is going to show me my cost avoidance results. So the trends and also the details show the results in a different format that you can copy to Excel. Trends is a little bit easier to see. This is showing, you can very easily see the months where I had a positive cost avoidance. In other words, I saved, where I had a loss. And the legend shows me some other color-coded things of interest. Let me just jump into a few and look at them. First, October 2016. Now, by clicking on that, we see the savings detail. This is probably the most valuable screen that there is in EnergyCAP to explain cost avoidance. Here's the way you interpret this. Starting from the outside and working in, the orange is the actual current use. So this is October 2016. This was my bill for October 2016. If you have the paper bill in your hand and you look at the consumption, it will say you consumed 144 therm. So that's my actual bill in October. Now in IPMVP option C, we compare today's bill with the baseline. So what was the baseline? My actual baseline bill was 761. Again, you could pick up the bill and verify that. Now I have to put a little footnote on that because the baseline bill would only say 761 if the billing period exactly aligned with today's bill. If the billing period did not perfectly align, we maybe took a day away from it or added 2 more days to it to get the 761. So that when we look at actual and baseline, we're comparing apples to apples. We're comparing the same number of days. But in IPMVP option C, we never compare actual against the raw baseline. We compare it against the adjusted baseline. And that's what the second bar is, the adjusted baseline, what we call the BATSI, the baseline that has been adjusted to current conditions. So we took the raw baseline and we adjusted it. Now notice that they're the same because there was nothing to adjust it for in this case. It's a month of October. There was no weather adjustment. There were no special adjustments in play. There was no floor area change. So there was no reason to make an adjustment. So in this case, the adjusted baseline is the same as the raw baseline. So now we compare my adjusted baseline, the BATSI, with the current bill, and you can see the difference. We avoided 617 therms of use. And just looking at the raw data, my usage this October was much less than it was in my 2013 October baseline. So we did a real good job. And then we apply the costing to it, the blended cost, and we get our cost avoidance. We can also go through this day by day by day by clicking on calculation by day and drill into it in even more detail. Now let's take a look at another one that might be more interesting. February 2015, I mentioned earlier that February of 2015 was a really cold, historically cold month right there. We have our actual current. So we used a lot of gas in February of 2015, this really, really cold month. Here was my baseline, my raw baseline. And when it is a heating month, you'll see the weather use in light blue and the non-weather use in dark blue. So it's showing that in my base year, most of my consumption was weather-related. Only a small piece was non-weather-related, domestic hot water and so on. And then you see the adjusted baseline. Notice the adjusted baseline was adjusted way up. The weather was really cold in Feb 2015 compared to Feb 2013. Therefore, we made an upward adjustment in the baseline because we want to compare a really, really cold month with a baseline that's adjusted to look like a really cold month. That's why the adjustment went up. Even with the adjustment going up, we still had a loss. So in other words, we used a lot more than the weather model would have predicted we should have used given the severity of the weather. Now, as we've drilled into some of these after the fact and said, really, did the people in the building just do a poor job, or did the weather model not really adjust it enough? What we found in a lot of cases was that when you have historically severe weather, some buildings will be put into a freeze protection mode. This is where the people responsible for operating the building say, it's supposed to be below 0 tonight with a wind chill. It's going to be -30. We don't want to risk any sprinkler pipes freezing and then bursting and causing a lot of damage in the building. So what we would rather do is spend extra money to heat the building more than normal and protect ourselves against freeze than risk it. So we found a lot of cases in this polar vortex situation. The buildings were put in freeze protection mode. They were basically, they weren't set back at night. The temperature wasn't set back. They were just run at 72 degrees all night long for protection against freezing. So the weather model is based on historic trends, and in your historic trends, we're not in freeze protection mode. All that to say that the building was operated differently in Feb of 2015, so the weather model did not adequately explain what happened. This would be a case where we'd have to go into EnergyCAP, enter a special adjustment, and tell EnergyCAP to add more therms to the adjusted baseline to account for the extra gas used in freeze protection. Now, to do that requires a mechanical engineering analysis of the building. You have to be able to make a calculation and justify it. So you can start to see how the skill level gets pretty high and time-consuming when you want to remove uncertainty from cost avoidance calculations. An exceptional situation like that can take a lot of effort to reasonably make special adjustments. Okay, well, I hope that gives you some flavor of how cost avoidance works. One more thing I wanted to show, and this is the January. Remember I said that because we had the outlier, the January was going to be turned off. And you can see for a lot of days in January, the weather use has been turned off. Not for all of them because of the overlap of billing periods, but for most of the days, weather adjustments were turned off. They were turned off because January baseline was an outlier, and we said when it's an outlier, we turn off weather adjustments. Okay, next, let me jump very quickly into the electric meter, look at a few things there. So here's the electric meter, again, 65, 65, a temp summer, a temp winter. The first thing when I look at this electric meter is that we clearly are not heating the building with electricity because my coldest days are my lowest use. So I'm not going to attempt a winter adjustment. I have the same baseline and saving start date. I've attempted a summer adjustment, but my usage is really pretty flat across all of the months that are considered air conditioning months. My balance point is set at 65. That doesn't look unreasonable. Maybe I'll set it to 64. But I noticed something here, and that is that some of my lowest consumption months are the hottest months. July, August, June. Now, why would my hottest months be lower consumption than these other more mild months in an elementary school that I know is air conditioned? Well, it's because in my summer months, the building isn't occupied. It has minimal number of people in it. So I have unusual consumption in the summer, unusual as far as a weather trend would indicate, and it causes my meter to be not weather sensitive. Well, because the summer months are not normal months from the way the building is normally used, I want to throw them out of the regression so they don't mess it up. I can user remove these by clicking on them. So I'm going to throw out this one, and I'm going to throw out that one, and I'm going to throw out that one. And notice that now I have a fair regression line. And from that, I can do some additional tuning. I guess it flips back every time I do that. Let me throw them out again. And these other months, there's September, May, October, and April. So I wanted to do that to illustrate that there might be situations where you find that you need to throw some points out. We can add some more years in here, as a matter of fact, and maybe get an even better picture of this. So sometimes you might have to throw months out that you know are abnormal. Now, when you throw these months out, it's the same impact as if it was an outlier. Weather adjustments will not take place in these months, but it will hopefully enable weather adjustments to take place in other months. And there's another outlier up here. That's a September. Well, I guess that didn't help me much by adding more years in that case, but you saw earlier when I only had 1 year of data, we had a pretty good regression when I threw out some of these months that were unusual. Okay, let me keep moving. There's a couple other things I want to talk about. Let's see. Okay, how to set up, first of all, special adjustments. A special adjustment is where we force an adjustment into the baseline for a condition that EnergyCAP normally wouldn't account for. So let's say we had extended occupancy in the month of June because we had a blizzard in January, school was closed, so we went a week longer in June. So now I want to make an adjustment to every June, or to the June in which I had the extra week of occupancy, to take that into account. So I'm going to say occupancy, and I'm going to say we had an extra week of school in June, and we're going to give it some start date. Now this was 26, say 2015. So in 2015, we had an extra week of school in June. So from June 10th to June 15th, the school was occupied. Normally it's unoccupied. And I'm going to add an adjustment, and I'm going to say add 3,000. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying force 3,000 kilowatt hours per day for a period of 6 days into the adjusted baseline, because in my current year I was occupied a week longer than I was in the baseline year. And the reason for that was school was closed for a week in January this year due to blizzard, so school was extended for a week in June. So therefore, because I want to compare apples to apples, I don't want to compare June baseline that was basically unoccupied with June of the current year that had an extra week of occupancy. So this is forcing extra kilowatt hours into the adjusted baseline. So that's what we do with adjustments. So that's showing that we have, just for these 6 days, we've added 3,000 per day to take that into account. That's a one-time special adjustment. That's just illustrating the way we can add special adjustments to the system. Something else you might want to do is what we call other savings. Other savings is where in some way you accrued some savings, you want that to appear on cost avoidance reports, but it doesn't fit into the calculations anywhere. let's say we had an other savings that was just a one-time. Let's say we did some meter consolidation. We had 2 meters, we consolidated them, we eliminated some monthly service charge. We haven't really changed kilowatt hours, but we've saved the monthly meter rental and so on, which accounts to $50 a month. Reduce 1 meter. And then we can say this is a one-time or a continuous. A continuous says that we did this in March of 2015, and we're really going to take credit for it forever. And that'll just add $50 every month to the cost avoidance reports, because that $50 savings wouldn't be reflected anywhere else. Okay, a few other things I wanted to point out real quickly. Administration has cost avoidance settings, some things you should be aware of. These meter settings are the values that the system defaults to when you create a new meter. You can change these for any meter on the meter screen, but in these global settings, we set what the default values are. So I have it defaulting to baseline of 2014, savings starting in 2015, 65 balance point, and so on. Another setting, the average unit cost range, is saying that if the average unit cost on today's bill varies from the average unit cost on the baseline bill by greater than these limits, it's going to assume today's bill is unusual, is just a strange one, and it will default to the baseline average unit cost. And then finally, globally update meters. This is a way you can update cost avoidance settings for many meters at once. For instance, if we'd say, we do not want to attempt a summer weather adjustment, nor do we want to attempt a winter adjustment when the commodity is water. That's 117 meters are water meters, and that instantly applied that to all those meters. So we don't want to try to weather adjust summer or winter for water meters. And then the final thing I wanted to point out was in bill processing. This is where we actually run the calculations. In calculate savings, this is where we process the baseline and then process the ongoing month-to-month savings. Normally, you do not have to reprocess the baseline. If you click reprocess the baseline, EnergyCAP is going to redo all the baseline calculations and then recalculate every single bill in the system, which isn't bad if you have a small database. But if you have 2,000 bills in your database and 10 years of history, it's a huge amount of calculation that's just coming up with the exact same numbers that you had before. There's absolutely no reason to do it. So on a day-to-day basis, you should not click reprocess baseline. The only time I would do that is if I had a wholesale change in, I changed weather stations, or I changed my baseline year, something that affects the baseline calculations. You normally do not have to reprocess baseline. All you have to do is calculate savings. It'll default to processing just those bills that are new bills in the system, and bills or bills that you edited. And then we click continue, and it will process new bills. There's no reason why month after month you should recalculate all bills. You're just going to end up with the same numbers over and over again and waste a lot of processor time. So normally, just leave the default settings where they are and continue, and you'll process the bills that are new to the system in the last month or something like that. But it won't be doing undue amounts of calculation. You'll see this log of all of your processor runs. If you open that up, it'll show you what you did that day. You can click on the Excel file and download it, and that Excel file will look something like this. And if you go to the savings log, it'll list every single meter and month. Every row is a meter and a month. So it's showing what the calculator ran on, the billing period, the meter. If your weather data has any glitches in it, if you're missing any weather data, it will alert you. It's good to know that. And also, if your average unit cost was abnormal, it will alert you. If your average unit cost is abnormal, it will default to your baseline average unit cost. What I would do is anywhere that it says my average unit cost range limit was exceeded, I would take a look at that bill, at this billing period, and say, why was my unit cost abnormal that month? Might be totally reasonable, might be a gas bill in the summer where you used 2 therms, but you paid your service charge, so it was $10 a therm. That would be a normal case of abnormal unit cost. Gas bills in the summer where the usage is super low. But it could be a billing error or a keying error as well. So when you see these yeses, I would take a look at them and say just what is going on there that's resulting in a very abnormal unit cost. Okay, well I know that that was like drinking from a fire hose. It was a lot of ground in a short period of time, but I don't want to go longer than this. If any of you have questions, I would say send them in, and what we've been doing is typing up the questions and the answers and then distributing those to attendees. So any questions that you might have will be answered. Certainly some of you might be wanting to get into this deeper. It is pretty involved. We would recommend extra training on it. So if you're interested to get into it, we of course have resources on the website. You might also consider attending our Catalyst training in April this year. It's the second week of April. We'll have multiple sessions on cost avoidance. Or of course, if you would prefer any on-site training or online training, we can make arrangements for that as well. So with that, and I should give you another reminder, we have some handouts that are posted in the webinar. You can download those. We'll be, I think, sending out a follow-up email. Matthew, is that right? Give people the link to the PDF, yep, the video, and the downloads. And I assume, Matthew, you've been collecting some questions.
I do. There are some good ones, so we'll be getting back to you shortly about the answers.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to do it, because some of the questions, I'm sure, would take 5 minutes or more for me to answer, and in the interest of people's time and getting to all these appropriately, I think it's better to give it to everyone in writing. So we'll do that. Again, thank you to everyone for attending. Happy New Year. We wish you the best in 2017, and we hope that your energy savings are better than expected. And we will be seeing you and talking to you. So have a great rest of the week. Thanks for attending. Bye.